Hey guys, and welcome back. Today, we're going to be making the adorable Baby Yoda and his flying Pram Pod. Okay, I know he's not really Baby Yoda, but I'm making this video spoiler-free for The Mandalorian Season 2. Alright, so if this is your first time watching, I have been making a series of videos to create a full Mandalorian suit cosplay. And now that I've done that, I know a lot of you guys want to see me make Baby Yoda from scratch here on the show, and I thought a lot about that. He's so specific looking that honestly the best way to make him would probably be to sculpt him and then mold and cast him. Now, if that's your thing and you have the experience, go for it. But if you don't have the tools and materials to do that, the next best option is honestly to just buy the toy. Now I know you're like, what? You never say that! But this is the Mattel toy, not sponsored by the way, although I wish I was. And he's only about $20 or $25, and for that price, he looks pretty good. Oh, that's funny. He matches my shirt. But once you have one of these guys, there are some cheap and pretty easy things to do to upgrade him, modify him a bit so he looks more realistic, and I'm also gonna try to make him so he's poseable. You can move his arms. So the first thing I want to do to him is paint his head. Now, what I want to do is coat him with black shoe polish. Now, this is kind of a running joke, right? Because I coated all of the armor in black shoe polish to weather it, including ruining the gloves by attempting to do that to them. So you probably think I sound crazy when I talk about doing it to this poor little guy. But let me explain where I'm coming from. These toys are made kind of in the same way I was describing earlier, where there's an original sculpt that is then molded out of plastic a million more times. And with that, the initial sculpt is actually quite detailed. But then when it's all just one shade of green plastic, you kind of lose a lot of that. You can't really see it too well, especially here on the video. So that's why I want to coat him with just a very light coat of some watered down shoe polish to get into really all of those grooves so that you can see them clearer, and it'll give him a lot more definition, because right now his whole head just kind of looks plastic, right? I put a little bit of polish on his head and his ears and then pretty quickly wiped most of it away because I was pretty scared of just staining his head black, but luckily enough it turned out quite well. Alright, this guy is looking pretty good. I think the shoe polish really added a lot of depth to him. It's not just one plastic color. It looks like he fits more in the real world now, and I like that. Next up, I'm going to do a little bit of detail painting, mainly just dry brushing a few additional colors, a little bit of pinks and orangey in his ears, as well as on the cheeks. I mixed up kind of an orange color and then lightly dabbed it on the inside of his ears. It does not need to be a full coat. And then I went back on the top edge with a bit of a stronger pink, as well as on his cheeks, and then a little on his nose and the edge of his eyelids, actually. Okay, so I am very happy with how the detail on the head turned out. I think he looks much more realistic now, and moving on. The next thing I want to do to this guy is, unfortunately, cut him open. I really want his arms to be poseable so that you can, move his arms around and they'll actually stay that way once you let go. And my idea for that is to basically shove some wire in his arms. I have this flexible garden wire which you can bend and it stays that way. Right? So imagine if that was his arm. Wait, that sounded like a threat. Never mind.
I cut his cloak off of him, and then I realized that I actually wanted to shoe polish his hands, so I quickly did that. Pay no attention to the fact that I just recklessly spilled shoe polish on his torso. It'll be covered in the end. I sadly made an incision in his back so that I could cut off part of that garden wire and, well, shove it into his arms. This is pretty self-explanatory. I decided to leave the foam covering still on it. Didn't seem to be a problem, but you don't have to. And then once I was done in there, I glued the seam back shut and added some tape to reinforce it. Also, while I had the cloak off, I decided to weather this a little bit, so I just took a little bit of brown paint, brushed it into some of the seams to give it a little bit more definition and a little dirt. I could have just glued or sewn the cloak together again, but I figured I'd make it removable, so I added some Velcro on the back of it.
Alright, with the cloak back on and the arms up, he is looking pretty awesome. But something you might be wondering is, why am I not giving him feet? And that's a fair question. You could totally sculpt some feet, paint them, and glue them onto the bottom. That would look really cool. But for me, for the particular thing I am going to use him for, this is sounding weird, but I don't need him to have feet, basically, for my future plans for this guy. But the last thing I want to give him is that little bit of hair on the top of his head. And so for that, I have this polyfill stuffing, which you can get from the store. I actually got it from the inside of him. While I cut him open and put the arms in. This is getting morbid, but I'm just going to take a little bit of this.
I coated the top of his head with a little Mod Podge, and then placed down literally every single hair individually. There's really not a ton, but I wanted them to be in the right spot.
Okay, so there's some little hairs on his head now. There's really not that many, even in the show, so yeah, it looks pretty good. The only thing I don't like is the Mod Podge left kind of a glossy finish on his head, but only the part where I put it, not like other spaces. So I think just to even it out, I'll take his cloak off and then hit him with a nice coat of satin clear coat. I think that's the move because it's not flat, but it's not super glossy, so yeah. Alright, so now for the exciting part. I am going to be making Baby Yoda's egg-shaped Pram Pod thing. So let me show you what I got. I'm going to start with 2 bowls. Now the first most obvious thing is that they're both circles, right? None of them are kind of that oval shape. But I couldn't find any bowls that looked like that, so we're gonna have to make do. I think I'm gonna take this big main one, which is gonna be our base, and cut a section out of the middle with a rotary tool, probably. I know this looks glass, but really it's just plastic, so it should cut fine.
I marked out where to cut. Now, this will vary depending on the size of the bowls you buy. I think mine's gonna end up being a little smaller than the real Pram is, but that's alright.
Alright, so I'm gonna cut this section out of the middle. It's about just under 3 inches, maybe 2 3/4 there.
I used my rotary tool to cut the whole diameter of this. Now you want to make sure that when you're cutting plastic, you have not only safety glasses on, but also a mask, because melted plastic gives off some pretty toxic fumes. Also, once I was done cutting these, I sanded the edges and then glued the 2 halves back together, but apparently I lost the footage of that.
Okay, so all glued together now. I added some duct tape to reinforce the seams on this guy. Feels pretty secure. And now, something specific to my bowl is it has this texture in it which I don't really like, but it was the right size, so I bought it. Now, you could try sanding this texture off so it's all smooth. I think instead I'm just gonna cover it. Now, covering this with like thin craft foam might be a little tricky because of that compound curve. So I think instead I'm going to do something that I haven't done in a long time, and that is paper mache. I believe the last time I ever paper mached was here on the show when I made the Tim Burton Batman cowl, but that was like 4 years ago, so yeah, this ought to be fun.
So, if you don't already know, paper mache is basically a mixture of half water and half flour. Kind of looks like pancake mix. Doesn't taste like it though. So you can coat strips of newspaper in it and then put it on something, and when it dries, it will be hardened. Now, this won't be a perfectly smooth surface. It'll still kind of look like strips of paper or something, but I'm okay with that texture. I just didn't want the original texture.
Alright, so this thing's all dry now, looking very nice, and we're ready to move on to the second bowl, which is this one right here. Now, it's a little smaller. Luckily, it can stay a circle, but this will go in right like that, and you can already see that's kind of the basic shape we're going with. Unfortunately, the bottom of this is obviously kind of flat, so we're gonna need to fill in this section right here, but that's good because there's an additional panel right there that I think we're gonna make out of some foam so it can bend and make that shape.
I took a large piece of 4mm craft foam, and there was kind of a lot of trial and error to get the geometry of this piece right, but eventually I figured it out, and I needed to cut a dart that's that wedge out of the middle there, that when I glue up, it gives it that curved shape. I glued it onto the main bowl, and then also glued that second plastic bowl on the inside. Building up some of the other details now, I cut a long strip of 4mm foam that I glued along the equator of the pram, and then there's some circles on either side, so I actually made that shape out of the lids to Pringles cans that I happened to use on Mando's jetpack when I made that a few weeks ago. I cut some additional pieces of foam to fill in some gaps and make it fit, and then there's another piece on the inside of the circles, and for that I used the caps to empty shampoo bottles, one of which is also in the jetpack. There's 3 raised panels on the back side, and for that I drew the shape and then made it out of 2mm thin craft foam.
You've probably already noticed that on this 4mm layer of foam, it wasn't perfectly formed right, so there's this peak here, and that might have been annoying you. I know it has been for me, so I think I'm just gonna snip that off, and then we will cover that with the 2mm layer. No one will know.
I took a big strip of 2mm foam and glued that on the bottom side of the pram. To make the piece on the inside of the lip, I first cut a bunch of 1-inch squares out of the 10mm floor mat foam, which I then glued along the inside, spaced out with a gap in between them. Then I glued another strip of 4mm along the inside to connect them all.
Alright, so this thing is coming together. I am loving the way it is looking, and there's just a few more details here and there to really finish it up and make it look great.
There's a piece on the front with 3 square buttons that I also made out of foam. There's another panel on the side of the pram, as well as a rounded piece that connects to the circles. Oh, keep in mind these are all duplicated and symmetrical on both sides of the pram, of course. There's there's 3 small ovals cut and glued on the back side, as well as 2 wedges on the top edge, which I think are kind of like latches. I mean, this thing's really supposed to open and close, right?
Okay, so I think that is it for all of the details I want on this guy and the entire build of it. So now the next step is to paint it. I am going to coat it with this off-white kind of eggshell color spray paint. Now my guess is this thing was originally, like when it was new, white, and that it's just been weathered down over time through a lot of dirt. And you could totally paint it white to start. That's kind of what I did on my Jason mask. It just took a lot of weathering to get it that kind of tan color. But if you want to save on that, you could just paint it tan from the start, and then you don't need to weather it as much. I'm going to kind of meet in the middle with the off-white, so yeah.
You may want to hit it with primer first, because it did take multiple coats for some of those Sharpie lines not to show through.
Alright, back inside after a few coats of spray paint. This thing's looking pretty cool, and now we can get to the detail painting.
I painted that interior lip with brown paint, as well as the inside of the pram. I painted some specific panels with orange paint, just to look at the picture, I guess, and see which ones are supposed to be orange, and the inside too, but you probably won't see much of that with Baby Yoda inside.
So I let this paint dry, and I'm really liking how it looks, but it's a little too clean, and so we're going to be weathering this piece 2 different ways.
First, I wanted a chipped paint effect, so I mixed up a dark grayish silver and then brushed that on some very specific spots and edges where this off-white paint has chipped away to reveal the metal underneath.
Now that I got these chips of paint, I want to do a wash over the whole thing to kind of dull it down, mute some of these vibrant colors, and age it a little bit. And I'm going to do that with something you'd never guess. Black shoe polish.
I didn't just want black shoe polish, so you could also use brown shoe polish, but I don't have any, so I just mixed some watered down brown paint and painted it over this whole thing. But I wiped almost all of it away. This is pretty subtle and just left a little bit of buildup in some of those seams and crevices in between those panels and details.
So thank you guys very much for watching. Make sure to hit that like button and share it with your friends. If you have any questions on this build, make sure to leave them in the comments section down below, as well as subscribe right here for new videos.